She would tell the story only once to a reporter who drove 4 hours from Flagstaff just to sit at her kitchen table. And when he asked her why she did it, why she opened her door to 30 strangers that every person in town had been warned about, Eleanor Hartwell set down her coffee cup, looked out the window at the road she had lived beside for 41 years, and said something the reporter would remember for the rest of his life. "My neighbor called the sheriff. I called them inside for dinner." That was all she offered, and somehow it was everything. To understand what happened in Seligman, Arizona on the third Tuesday of August, you have to understand the town first. You have to understand what it means to live on a road that the rest of the country forgot. Route 66 through Seligman is not the romantic version people imagine when they hear the name. It is not the painted postcards, or the tourist murals, or the nostalgia that passes through on summer weekends in rented convertibles. The real Route 66, the one that Eleanor Hartwell looked at every morning from her front porch, is cracked asphalt in dry wind, in the particular silence of a place that progress simply drove around. When the interstate went in, it did not pass through Seligman. It passed 40 miles south of it. And the town, 460 souls, 2 gas stations, 1 diner, and a post office that opened 3 days a week, simply stayed where it was and learned to live with less. Eleanor had learned that lesson better than most. The house had been beautiful once. Anyone who saw it now would struggle to believe that, but it was true. Frank Hartwell had built it with his own hands in 1976, the year after they were married, working evenings and weekends around the jobs that kept them fed. He was a contractor by trade and a craftsman by instinct. And the house he built for Eleanor was solid in the way that things are solid when someone builds them out of love rather than obligation. Wide porch, deep eaves, windows that caught the afternoon light in a way that made the front room glow amber every evening around 5 o'clock. That was a long time ago. 15 years of Arizona sun and wind and neglect, the kind of neglect that comes not from carelessness, but from poverty, from the slow arithmetic of a fixed income that never quite covers everything it needs to cover, had done what time does to things left without protection. The paint was gone from most of the exterior walls, stripped back to bare wood that had gone gray and soft in places. The roof sagged along its center ridge, bowing inward, where 2 seasons of monsoon water had soaked through the damaged underlayment and rotted the supports beneath. The porch steps, Frank had built them from good Douglas fir in 1977, had been repaired so many times with whatever material was available that they were now a kind of archaeological record of Eleanor's diminishing resources. The third step had broken through entirely 3 months ago. She had learned to skip it. The windows on the upper floor were the thing that bothered her most. 2 of them had cracked in a hailstorm 4 winters back, and she had covered them with plywood cut from an old cabinet and secured with screws she found in Frank's workbench. The plywood had warped. It let in cold air in the winter and kept out light year-round. She had stopped going into those rooms because the plywood reminded her of what she could not fix, and Eleanor Hartwell preferred not to dwell on things she could not fix. What she could do, she did. Every morning, regardless of season, she rose at 5:30, dressed in the half-dark, and went downstairs to make coffee. Not because she needed the caffeine at 73, she had largely given up the pretense that coffee was about anything other than ritual, but because Frank had made coffee every morning of their 36 years together, and the smell of it still made the house feel less empty. She carried her cup out to the porch, settled into the wooden chair she had moved out there permanently after Frank died, and watched the road wake up. There was not much to watch most mornings. A cattle truck before dawn, the mail carrier around 10. Donna Wakefield opening the diner across and down the block, the neon coffee cup in her window buzzing to life at 6:45 like clockwork. But Eleanor watched anyway. It was her road. It had been her road for 41 years, and she intended to sit on this porch and watch it for however many years remained to her roof or no roof. She lived on Social Security in the vegetable garden behind the house. The tomatoes were exceptional that year. The squash was adequate. The green beans had done better than expected, and she had put up 14 jars of them in July using a canning kit that had belonged to her mother. The envelope from the bank sat on the kitchen counter, unopened for 11 days now. She knew what it said. She had known what it would say before it arrived. Knowing and reading were different things, and she saw no particular reason to read something she already knew. On the morning of the third Tuesday in August, Eleanor sat on her porch and watched the sky. The monsoon season in northwestern Arizona is not the gentle, cinematic rainfall of other places. It is a violence. It builds over the plateau in the early afternoon, a column of cloud that grows upward with frightening speed, anvil-shaped and blue-black at its base, and when it moves fast. Eleanor had lived through 40 monsoon seasons on this porch. She knew what was coming, the way she knew the sound of the third step by feel by memory, by the particular ache in the joints of her right hand that Frank had always teased her about. This one was going to be bad. She was still sitting there watching the cloud mass build over the western ridgeline when she heard Sandra Briggs's gate. Sandra lived 3 houses east in a house that was newer and better maintained, with a lawn that she watered even during drought restrictions, and a flag that she changed out every 30 days with the precision of a military ceremony. Sandra had appointed herself the neighborhood's primary source of information, a role she filled with genuine dedication and complete absence of self-awareness. She was not a malicious woman, she was simply one of those people who confuse surveillance with community. She came through Eleanor's gate without knocking on it, which was her habit, and she came fast, which was unusual. Eleanor. She was slightly out of breath. I just heard from Patty Ingram, whose husband was at the gas station on the East End. There's a motorcycle convoy coming through. A big one. She said the last part with the weight of someone delivering confirmed intelligence. Hell's Angels! Eleanor looked at her over the rim of her coffee cup. How far out? 20 minutes, maybe. They're coming up 66 from Kingman. Sandra glanced at the gathering storm on the horizon and then back at Eleanor with an expression that was equal parts fear and the particular excitement of someone who has information others lack. You need to go inside and lock your doors, Eleanor. I'm calling Ray Dobson as soon as I get home. Sandra. These are not good people. You read what they do. Sandra. Eleanor's voice was not loud. It never was. But it had a quality that Frank had once described as a door closing, not slamming, just firmly, finally, shutting. Thank you for letting me know. Sandra looked at her for a moment. Then she turned and went back through the gate, the way she had come, already reaching for the phone in her cardigan pocket. Eleanor finished her coffee. She could hear them before she could see them. That was always the way with a large convoy. The sound arrived first, a low harmonic rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once, like something geological rather than mechanical. She set her cup on the railing and stood. The cloud mass had moved considerably in the last 20 minutes. It was close now, and the light had taken on that strange yellow-green quality that preceded the worst storms, a color that had no analog in ordinary weather, and that Eleanor had always found faintly ominous. The first bite came around the eastern bend in the road, then another, then a river of them 30 motorcycles riding in a loose formation, their chrome catching the strange pre-storm light. She could see the leather vests from 100 yards. She could see the patches. She could see the skull insignia that Sandra had been so afraid of. What she saw looking at them from her porch was 30 people who were about to get caught in a very bad storm with no shelter for miles in either direction. The road shoulder through Seligman offered nothing. The businesses on Main Street, the 2 that remained open regularly, would lock their doors before the first bike reached them. She knew this without needing to verify it. She had lived in this town long enough to know its reflexes. The lead bike slowed as it passed the front of her property. The rider was a large man, maybe 58, with gray hair pulled back under his helmet in a bearing that reminded Eleanor in some way she could not immediately articulate of men she had known who had been through serious difficulty and come out the other side of it changed, not broken, changed. He looked at the house. He looked at her. He kept moving, but the storm was moving faster. The first drops hit the porch railing like thrown coins. Then the wind came a wall of it, 30 miles an hour, and rising, carrying dust and the sharp smell of wet creosote. The convoy had stopped about a quarter-mile east, the riders bunched together on the road shoulder. Eleanor could see them in the thickening haze of the rain's leading edge, and she could see that they were looking at the sea the way people look at things that are about to hurt them. Frank had built this porch to sit on. He had built the gate at the end of the front walk to open. He had spent his entire working life opening things for people, doors, possibilities, second chances, and he had married Eleanor because he recognized in her the same inclination. He used to say it simply the way he said most important thing, character to shown when it costs you something. Eleanor walked down her porch steps, skipping the broken third one by habit, and opened the gate. She stood in the opening. The rain was coming harder now. She raised her hand. The lead rider saw her. He turned his bike. The others followed. They came into her yard in orderly pairs, cutting their engines one by one, until the sudden silence was remarkable. 30 motorcycles gone quiet, rain falling on chrome and leather, and Eleanor Hartwell standing at her gate in her faded cardigan with her hand still raised. The lead rider pulled off his helmet. Close up, he was exactly what she had sensed from a distance, a man shaped by hard miles with a scar through his left eyebrow and eyes that were against all expectation kind. His vest identified him as Marcus Calloway. The patch below his name said Flagstaff Chapter. The one below that said something in abbreviated club language she did not read. "Ma'am," his voice was low measured, "we don't want trouble. We're just looking for somewhere to wait out this storm. Is there a shelter?" "There's no shelter for 7 miles, Eleanor said. "Bring those bikes around back. There's a carport. It's not much, but it'll keep the worst off them." She looked past him at the others, already wet rain darkening their leather. "Then come inside. I'll put on something to eat." He stared at her. It was not an unfriendly stare. It was the stare of a man who was recalibrating something. "Ma'am, there's 30 of us." "I can count," Eleanor said. "Come around back. Don't track mud through the front room if you can help it." The younger one, stocky mid-30s with grease so worked into his hands that no amount of washing would fully remove it, appeared at Marcus's shoulder. His vest said Danny Reeves, and below that wrench. He was looking at the house the way a mechanic looks at an engine, with professional assessment and no pretense. "Go on," Marcus said to him quietly. Then to Eleanor, "I'm Marcus Calloway. We're grateful to you." "Eleanor Hartwell," she said, "you can be grateful inside. It's getting wet out here." They moved with a kind of discipline she had not expected, orderly, efficient, each man seeming to know his role without being told. The motorcycles were guided around the side of the house to the carport in the back, positioned with care, covered where possible with rain gear produced from saddlebags. Within 4 minutes, they were at her back door, removing boots on the mat without being asked, shaking rain from their jackets, and hanging them on the hooks, she indicated without making a production of it. 30 men in a house built for 2. The rooms were small. The ceilings felt lower with so many people under them. But they arranged themselves with a consideration for the space that she found quietly remarkable. No one sat on the furniture without her indicating it was all right. No one touched anything on the shelves or tables. No one moved through rooms with the carelessness of people who assume permission. Eleanor went to her kitchen and stood in front of her open refrigerator and pantry for a moment, taking inventory. 2 pounds of ground beef from last week's shop, 3 boxes of pasta, canned tomatoes, green beans from the garden blanched and ready, the heel of a bread loaf she had baked Sunday. Some odds and ends that would not amount to anything on their own, but might contribute to a sauce. It would have to be enough. She had fed Frank through 3 years of lean contracting work in the early 80s when jobs dried up, and she'd learned what it meant to cook with almost nothing. You made it stretch. You made it good. You did not apologize for what the table offered. She was browning the ground beef when Danny Reeves appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Can I help with anything?" He said it without performance, not politeness for its own sake, but the practical offer of someone who saw work that needed doing and did not see a reason to stand idle. Eleanor looked at him over her shoulder. "You can dice those tomatoes." She pointed to the bowl on the counter. "And if you or anyone else knows how to fix a bathroom faucet that's been dripping for 2 months, I won't say no." He nodded once and picked up the knife she'd left on the cutting board. Within 10 minutes, there were 3 men in her kitchen helping prepare food correctly without needing instruction, without getting in each other's way. 2 more had asked permission to look at the bathroom plumbing and were now under the sink with a wrench that one of them had produced from a jacket pocket. Another was examining the dead electrical outlet in the living room that had stopped working the previous winter. The storm hit full force at 4:15. It was the kind of rain that Arizona produces maybe twice a decade, a true cloudburst, the sky simply releasing everything at once. The sound on the roof was like continuous applause. Lightning cracked close enough to feel through the floorboards. The lights flickered twice and held. Eleanor stood at her stove, stirring the sauce, and listened to the storm assault her house the way it had assaulted it every summer for 41 years, and she cooked. The men who were not in the kitchen distributed themselves through the small house with the care of people who understood they were guests in someone else's space. They spoke in low voices. They did not move things. The youngest ones there were four or so, who couldn't have been older than 30, had a quality of stillness about them that she recognized as the stillness of people who had learned to be careful in unfamiliar places. She fed them in shifts the kitchen table, and the four mismatched chairs in the living room pressed into service plates refilled when they were empty. The spaghetti stretched further than she had expected. She kept for herself a smaller portion than she gave anyone else, which was her habit in company, and it did not occur to her to think of it as sacrifice. By 9 o'clock, the storm had settled into a steady, heavy rain rather than the initial violence. The lightning had moved east. The men had washed her dishes, insisted on it actually, and done it well, and arranged themselves throughout the rooms to wait out what was clearly going to be a long night. Some did, some spoke quietly in pairs or small groups. Marcus and Danny sat at her kitchen table across from each other, and Eleanor, whose body told her it was past her usual bedtime, but whose sense of obligation to her guests overrode it, poured what remained of the coffee grounds into enough water to produce something resembling coffee and sat with them. "You live here by yourself," Marcus said. It was not quite a question. 15 years now. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "My husband Frank passed. My daughter Laurel moved to California." She looked at the kitchen walls, the water stain along the ceiling's edge, the wallpaper she had been meaning to replace since 2015. "It's home." Danny said nothing, but he was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone taking notes. Marcus was looking at the photograph on the kitchen wall. It had hung there since 1976, Frank and Eleanor at the doorway of the just-finished house. Frank was sawdust still on his jeans, Eleanor laughing at something he had said a moment before the shutter opened. She had always loved that photograph because it caught something true rather than something posed. "Your husband," Marcus said slowly. He did not look away from the photograph. "Frank Hartwell." "Yes," she watched him. "Did you know him?" A long pause, the rain on the roof, the refrigerator's hum. "No," Marcus said. The name sounded familiar." He looked down at his coffee. Something had changed in his face, something subtle and internal that Eleanor noted but did not press. A man was entitled to his private recognitions. They talked for another hour. Or rather, Eleanor talked, and Marcus listened with the focused attention of someone who did not often encounter people who spoke plainly and meant what they said. She told him about Frank's contracting business, about the early years on Route 66, when Seligman was still a real stop on a real road, about what it was like to watch a town diminish slowly over decades, to see the businesses close one by one, until what remained was just enough to call a town and nothing more. "Why did you stay?" Danny asked at one point. Eleanor considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because it's mine," she said finally. "Frank built that house. I'm not leaving it to fall down by itself." Just before midnight, she heard the sound she had been half expecting since Sandra Briggs had gone home to her phone. Tires on wet gravel, the creak of a car door, then boots on her porch steps, the good ones, not the broken third one, which meant whoever it was knew which ones to use, which meant it was someone who had been here before. The knock came in that official way that knocks from authority figures always come, not aggressive, but weighted, announcing rather than asking. Eleanor rose from the kitchen table. She was aware of the shift in the room, the way the men who were awake went, still not with fear, Ezekiel, but with a readiness that told her they had been in situations like this before and knew how they could go. She walked to the front door and opened it. Sheriff Ray Dobson stood on her porch in his rain gear, his cruiser pulled to the side of the road with the lights going red and blue, cutting through the rain in slow pulses that colored the whole front of the house. He was 61, had been sheriff for 9 years, and had the weathered, deliberate quality of a man who had learned to resolve most situations without raising his voice. He was not a bad man. Eleanor had known him since he was on the county force 20 years ago, before he made sheriff. He was not a bad man, but he was in this particular moment wrong. She stood in the doorway, not behind it, in it. "Eleanor." He looked past her into the lit hallway where two of the bikers were visible, one seated on the floor against the wall, one standing near the bathroom door, both now watching the exchange with careful attention. Dobson looked back at her. "I got a call." "I imagine you did." "These men are my guests," Eleanor said. "They were caught in the storm. I invited them in." "Eleanor, these are Hell's Angels. I know who they are, Ray." Her voice had that quality again. Door closing, firmly, finally. "They've been here since 4 o'clock. They helped cook dinner. They fixed my bathroom faucet. They washed my dishes. She looked at him steadily. Would you like to come in? I can heat up the last of the coffee. Dobson looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her again at the men in her hallway. Marcus had appeared at the end of the hall, just standing there, hands visible, saying nothing. The sheriff's jaw worked slightly. If anything happens, nothing is going to happen, Eleanor said, except that 30 people are going to sleep in my house tonight because it's raining and there's nowhere else to go. You are welcome to verify that in the morning. Dobson held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he stepped back, nodded once, not agreement exactly, but acknowledgement, and walked back to his cruiser. What neither Eleanor nor Dobson knew in that moment was that a car had stopped on the road shoulder 40 yards east. Tom Archer, a reporter for the Flagstaff Courier, had been driving back from an assignment in Kingman when the storm forced him to pull over and wait. He had his window cracked for air and his phone in his hand. He had watched the cruiser pull up. He had watched the exchange on the porch. He had captured in a single photograph taken through his rain-blurred windshield the image that would be on the front page of 3 newspapers by Thursday morning and shared across the internet by Friday afternoon. Eleanor Hartwell, 73 years old, standing in her doorway, in her cardigan with the lights of a police cruiser painting her in blue and red, not moving, not flinching, simply occupying the threshold of her own home with the complete authority of a person who had made up her mind. He didn't know her name yet. He would find it out. Eleanor returned to the kitchen. She refilled her coffee without a word. After a moment, Marcus, who had watched the whole thing from the hallway, came back to the table and sat down. He did not say anything for a while. Neither did she. The rain continued. The house held. Mrs. Hartwell, he said finally, why do you do this? The whole town was ready to lock their doors, and you, he stopped, reconsidered. Most people wouldn't. Eleanor looked at her coffee cup, at the water stain on the ceiling, at the photograph of Frank on the wall with sawdust on his jeans and something in his eyes that had never changed, not once in 36 years. Frank used to say that character is shown when it costs you something, she said. This cost me a week's worth of groceries and some sleep. She looked at Marcus. That's not a very high price for doing the right thing. Marcus looked at the photograph again in the way he had before, that long, particular look that was something more than casual attention. She would understand it later. Not tonight. Tonight she left them with clean blankets and the knowledge that they were safe inside 4 walls in a storm, and she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, stepping over the board she knew was soft, and lay down in the bed she had shared with Frank for 36 years and listened to the rain. Below her 30, Hell's Angels settled into her small house for the night. And Eleanor Hartwell, who had done nothing more or less than what she believed any decent person ought to do, slept without difficulty. She had always been able to sleep when her conscience was clean. Morning came with that particular clarity that only arrives after a hard rain, the air washed new, the colors of everything saturated and precise, the sky in blue that seemed to belong to a different atmosphere entirely. Eleanor was dressed and downstairs before the first bike engine turned over. They were organized as they had been the night before. Boots retrieved and laced, jackets checked and zipped. Bikes walked from the carport and arranged in the front, not on her lawn on the road shoulder, with the same care and order they had used coming in. She made what coffee she could from the last of the grounds and set it out in the kitchen, and they filed through in small groups, cup and back, until it was gone. Nobody took more than 1 cup. Nobody had to be told. Danny Reeves was the last one through the kitchen, and when he finished his coffee, he set the cup carefully in the drying rack and looked at Eleanor with the direct, unornamented expression of a man who was about to say something he had been thinking about since last night. Your roof is not going to make it through another winter, he said. Those upper windows are a safety issue. The porch boards on the east side are rotted through underneath. You can't see it from the surface, but I checked this morning. I know, Eleanor said. You need work done. I know that too. He looked at her steadily, not with pity, with something more like professional recognition, the acknowledgement of one person who understood structural reality to another. Then he nodded once the way men nod when they're filing something away, and went outside. Marcus found her on the porch as the convoy was forming up in the road. He was the last to leave, as she suspected he had intended to be. He reached into his vest and produced a card, not a business card, just a piece of heavy paper with a phone number written on it in clear, deliberate handwriting. He held it out. Anything you need, he said, day or night. You call that number. Eleanor took the card. She looked at it. She looked at him. Thank you for being good guests, she said. Something moved in his face, something that was almost but not quite a question. Your husband's name, he said, Frank Hartwell. He was a contractor. All his working life. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Around him, engines were coming to life. In sequence, a low-rolling thunder building from east to west along the convoy. Safe roads, Mrs. Hartwell, he said. Safe roads, she said. She watched them form up, watched them move out in their practice formation, the sound of their engines rising and then leveling as they found speed on the open road. Watched them until the last one disappeared around the eastern curve and the sound faded to nothing, and Route 66 was just Route 66 again. Danny had taken photographs of the house before he left. She had watched him do it from the porch, systematic, thorough, every angle of every wall, close-ups of the roof line and the windows and the porch boards. He had not tried to hide it, and she had not asked him to stop. She knew what it meant. She was not certain yet how she felt about it. Eleanor went inside. She washed the last of the cups. She opened the envelope from the bank that had sat on the counter for 11 days and read the number written there, the mortgage balance that had been Frank's last financial act before his heart gave out, the loan he'd taken to cover the medical bills in his final year, the debt that had been sitting on this house like a slow-moving weight for 15 years. She folded the letter back along its creases and set it on the counter. Then she went out to her vegetable garden and checked the tomatoes, which were coming along fine, and the green beans, which needed picking, and she picked them, methodical, efficient, moving down the rows in the clear morning air, while the road dried in the sun, and the town of Seligman, Arizona, went about its business as though nothing had happened. Sandra Briggs would come by that afternoon. The talk would start. The looks at the grocery store would start. Sheriff Dobson would file a report that described the incident in language carefully calibrated to say nothing while appearing to say something. None of it would matter very much to Eleanor Hartwell, who had done what she had done because it was the right thing to do, and who had lived long enough to know that the right thing and the comfortable thing are almost never the same thing, and who had made her peace with that distinction somewhere around her 55th year and never revisited it. What she did not know, what she could not have known, standing in her garden in the clear morning light, her hands full of green beans, was that Marcus Calloway was already on his phone before he had cleared the Seligman town limit. She did not know what he was saying. She did not know who he was saying it to or how many people he would say it to before the day was done. She did not know that Danny Reeves's photographs were already being forwarded to people with skills she had not asked for and resources she could not imagine. She did not know that the card she had slipped into her cardigan pocket was about to become the most important piece of paper she had handled since Frank's death certificate. All she knew was that the beans needed picking, and the sun was warm, and the road out front was dry. For now, that was enough. Sandra Briggs came by that afternoon as Eleanor had known she would. She did not come to the door. She stood at the gate, the same gate Eleanor had opened the evening before, and called out from there, as though the property itself might be contaminated by what had happened on it. Eleanor was on the porch with her green beans and a colander, and she looked up and waited. I want you to know, Sandra said, that Ray Dobson came to my house this morning. He said there was nothing he could do because you invited them in voluntarily. She said the word voluntarily the way people say words they consider evidence of poor judgment. I told him that was exactly the problem. Eleanor separated a handful of beans and set them in the colander. Was there something you needed, Sandra? I needed to make sure you were all right. I'm all right. Sandra looked at the house, at the porch, at Eleanor sitting with her beans in the morning sun as though nothing had occurred. You fed them your food. I did. Eleanor. Her voice dropped into something that wanted to be concern but had the shape of reproach. You don't have food to spare. Everybody knows that. Eleanor set down the colander and looked at Sandra Briggs with the full level attention she reserved for moments when she wanted to make certain she was understood. What everybody knows, she said carefully, and what is true are not always the same thing. I had enough to feed my guests. I did. And that is the end of that particular conversation. Sandra left. She would go home and make phone calls, and the phone calls would branch into other phone calls, and by dinner time, the story would have traveled to every household in Seligman in the way that stories travel in small towns, not as facts, but as weather arriving everywhere at once changed slightly by each telling, accumulating detail that had not been present in the original event. Eleanor knew this. She went back to her beans. What she did not know, what she was not yet thinking about, was that the story was also traveling in another direction, moving outward from Marcus Calloway's phone through a network that operated on entirely different principles than small-town gossip. No embellishment, no judgment, just information passed between people who trusted each other, and a question attached to it, and a response that was building before the afternoon was half over. She found out about Tom Archer's photograph on Wednesday morning. Donna Wakefield brought it to her, a printout from the newspaper's website, Donna having correctly assessed that Eleanor did not habitually read news online, and that this was something she needed to see. Donna was 53, broad-shouldered, practical-minded, the kind of woman who solved problems before other people finished identifying them. She had run the diner on Route 66 for 11 years, fed half the town on credit during bad stretches without making a production of it, and was one of perhaps 4 people in Seligman whose opinion Eleanor genuinely valued. She set the printout on Eleanor's kitchen table and poured herself coffee from the pot, without asking which was her right as a person who had been coming through this kitchen door for a decade. Eleanor looked at the photograph. She was not prepared for it. She had known Tom Archer was there, had registered the stopped car on the road shoulder of the cracked window, but she had not thought of herself as something being documented. She had thought of herself as simply standing in her own doorway. And that was what the photograph showed technically. But the way it showed it, the police cruiser's lights coloring the rain in slow pulses, the darkness of the storm still present in the sky behind the house, Eleanor herself, a small, still figure in the illuminated doorway, in her cardigan not moving, not yielding, it showed something more than that. The caption read, "Seligman woman opens her home to 30 Hells Angels during monsoon. Sheriff responds." "It's on the Flagstaff paper's front page," Donna said, sitting down across from her. "And it's been shared quite a bit online. Tom Archer called the diner this morning. He wants to interview you." Eleanor looked at the photograph for another moment. Then she set it aside. "How are your pie sales?" she said. Donna looked at her. "Eleanor, I'm asking a genuine question." "Blueberries been slow, apples holding." Donna leaned forward. "You need to think about what this means. People are paying attention now. People always pay attention. They stop when something more interesting happens." Maybe not this time." Donna wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "Danny Reeves came into the diner yesterday evening, just him on his way through. He had coffee and a piece of pie, and he asked me 4 or 5 questions about you that he pretended were casual conversation." Eleanor was quiet. "What kind of questions?" she said. "How long you'd lived here, whether you had family nearby, whether anyone looked in on you regularly." Donna paused. He was very polite about it, but he had that look, like a man who already knows what he's going to do and is just filling in the last few details. Eleanor understood. She had recognized it when Danny was photographing the house that focused inventory and quality. The look of a man who was not looking at what was there, but at what could be done about it. She sat with this information for the rest of the day. On Thursday morning, she made her decision. She took Marcus Calloway's card from her cardigan pocket. She had moved it to fresh cardigans each morning that without examining why, and she looked at the number for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and dialed it. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Hartwell?" He had known it was her. Of course he had. She filed this away. "Mr. Calloway." She stood at her kitchen counter looking out the window at the road. "I want to have a conversation before anything else happens. Are you somewhere you can talk?" "I'm always somewhere I can talk when you call." "Danny photographed the house." A brief pause. "He did. And I suspect that photograph is somewhere it shouldn't be from my perspective. He shared it with people who know what they're looking at when they look at structural damage." Eleanor nodded to herself. She had expected as much. "I want to be clear about something, Mr. Calloway. I did not feed 30 people so that something could be done for me in return. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I don't want charity. I've never taken charity in my life, and I don't intend to start." The pause this time was longer. "Mrs. Hartwell," Marcus said, and his voice had shifted, not softer exactly, but more deliberate, as though he was choosing words that had been considered carefully. What we're talking about is not charity. I need you to understand the difference because it matters. Explain the difference to me. Charity is given because the giver feels generous. What I'm talking about is a debt of honor. You gave us shelter when you had almost nothing to give. You fed us when you were short on food yourself. You stood in your doorway and faced down a sheriff's cruiser rather than let someone make us feel unwelcome in your home. In our world, in the world I've lived in for 30 years, that kind of thing is not forgotten. It's not allowed to be forgotten. Eleanor listened. So we're not asking your permission to be generous, he continued. We're asking your permission to pay what we owe. Those are not the same thing. The road was empty in both directions. A hawk was sitting on the telephone wire east of the property, doing what hawks do, watching everything missing, nothing. Saturday, Eleanor said, 7 a.m. You come and look at the house properly. We discuss what actually needs doing. I have approval over the plan before anything starts. Those are my conditions. Those are reasonable conditions. And Mr. Calloway, she paused, how many people are we talking about? Another pause, longer than the others. It's better if I tell you that in person, he said. She should have pressed him on it. She would later think she should have pressed him. Instead, she said she would see him Saturday and hung up and went about her morning in the way she always went about her morning, because routine was the thing that held a life together when circumstances were doing their best to unsettle it. Friday brought two things she had not anticipated. The first was Sandra Briggs, who came to the door properly. This time knocked, waited, came inside when invited, and sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded and said without preamble that she had read the article. Eleanor waited. I may have been hasty, Sandra said. You were frightened, Eleanor said. That's different from hasty. Sandra looked at her hands. They didn't take anything. No. Or break anything. No. They fixed your faucet and the outlet in the living room. Eleanor set a cup of coffee in front of her. They were good guests, Sandra, that's all. They needed help, and I had some to give. It wasn't more complicated than that. Sandra sat with this for a moment. She did not say anything else about it. But she stayed for 40 minutes and talked about other things, and when she left, something between them had shifted by a degree that was small, but would Eleanor suspected prove permanent. The second thing was a phone call from a number she did not recognize. California area code. She almost did not answer it. Then she did. Mom? 11 years of silence had not changed Laurel's voice as much as Eleanor had expected. It was older, the edges of it rounded down by time, and whatever life in California had made of her, but the pattern of it, the particular rhythm of how her daughter assembled words was exactly as Eleanor remembered. Laurel. A pause on both ends. I saw the article, Laurel said, and the photograph. I imagine a lot of people did. Mom. Another pause. Are you all right? Eleanor considered the question with the seriousness she gave all genuine questions. I'm all right, she said. I've been all right. The house looks, Laurel stopped. The house looks the way it looks, Eleanor said. It's been 15 years, Laurel. Things wear out. The conversation was short. It was careful in the way that conversations are careful after long estrangements, when both people are aware that the wrong word in the wrong place can close a door that is only just cracked open. They did not resolve anything. They did not relitigate the years that had passed without contact. But when Laurel said goodbye, she said she would call again, and Eleanor, who was not a woman given to self-deception, believed her. She hung up and stood in her kitchen for a moment with her hand still on the phone. Then she went to her vegetable garden and worked until the light failed. Saturday arrived with the sky that had no weather in it, pure and still, and hot, the kind of Arizona morning that exists between seasons after the monsoon and before the cold. Eleanor was on the porch at 6:30, coffee in hand, watching the road. She heard them before she saw them, as she always did. But what she heard this time was not what she had heard before. The sound that had preceded 30 motorcycles on Tuesday evening was a low, manageable rumble, something a person could hold in their mind as a single thing. What she heard now was something else entirely. It did not arrive as a rumble. It arrived as a change in the quality of the air, a deep harmonic vibration that she felt in the boards of the porch before she could process it as sound. It was geological. It was the sound of something very large moving toward a fixed point, and the fixed point was her house. Marcus Calloway turned into her road ahead of them. Behind him, as far as she could see, past the east curve, past the gas station, past the point where Route 66 disappeared into the flat scrubland motorcycles. Hundreds of them, moving in formation in columns, filling the road from shoulder to shoulder. The chrome of their bikes caught the early sun and threw light in long pulses down the length of the road. Eleanor put her coffee cup down on the railing. She had asked him how many. He had said it was better to tell her in person. She understood now why he had said that. Danny Reeves was behind Marcus and behind Danny. The road was simply full, not crowded, not congested, but full. The way a river is full, filling the available space with a steady, purposeful flow that gave no impression of disorganization or chaos, only of scale. They pulled to the road shoulder. They filled the shoulder and the lot across the road and the space beyond. They pulled in with an orderliness she had observed on Tuesday engines, cutting in sequence, the sound dying down section by section until what remained was a low residual quiet and the settling sounds of hot metal. 800 motorcycles. She counted the rows later with Danny's help because she needed to make it real by making it countable. 812 in the final tally. Marcus was on her porch before she had fully processed what she was looking at. He was in his riding clothes, road-dusted, and he looked at her with an expression that she would describe to Tom Archer the following weekend as the look of a man who has done something he believes in completely and is waiting to find out if the other person understands why. "Morning, Mrs. Hartwell," he said. She looked past him at the road, at the hundreds of people standing quietly beside their bikes, watching the house, watching the porch. Not moving, not impatient, just present in the particular intentional way that a large group of people is present when they have all agreed on a single purpose. "You said to tell you in person," Marcus said. Eleanor Hartwell stood on her porch with her empty coffee cup in her hand and looked at what had come down Route 66 to her gate on a clear Saturday morning in August, and she did the thing she had done when she stood at the doorway in the rain on Tuesday night. She did not step back. She did not look away. She took it in, all of it, and she let it be what it was. "You're going to need someone to coordinate the work," she said. Danny Reeves, who had come up behind Marcus, produced a notebook from his jacket pocket. "Already done," he said. "Roofing crew, electrical, plumbing, structural. Materials are coming from Flagstaff. Permit was processed yesterday." She looked at him. "You got a permit processed in one day." "Sheriff Dobson helped." "Ray Dobson. He called the county office himself." Danny said it without particular emphasis, as though it were not remarkable. He told them it was a priority. This was, Eleanor would later reflect, the moment she understood that something larger than she could manage alone had already been set in motion, and that her role now was not to direct it, but to trust the direction it was moving. This was not a comfortable realization for a woman who had managed alone for 15 years. But she was also old enough to know the difference between pride and wisdom, and to choose the latter when the choice was available to her. "There's a condition," she said. Marcus waited. "I want final say on anything structural. This is still my house. The decisions about what goes where are mine." "Understood. And I want the vegetable garden left exactly as it is." "It'll be better than you left it," Danny said. "We brought fencing material." Eleanor looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Marcus. Then she looked at the road, at the hundreds of people who had cleared their schedules and ridden from wherever they had ridden from to be here on a Saturday morning at 7 a.m. in Seligman, Arizona, because one elderly woman had made a pot of spaghetti during a rainstorm. "All right," she said, "then let's get started." What happened next would be described in Tom Archer's article, now picked up by the Associated Press, and running in 11 states as the largest voluntary community construction effort in Yavapai County history. That was technically accurate. It did not quite capture the reality of what it looked like from Eleanor's porch. It looked like purpose. That was the only word that fit. 800 people arriving at a problem with the focused, organized intention of people who had discussed what needed doing, divided the labor, and come prepared to execute it. Trucks had been following the convoy. Eleanor counted 6 of them. Heavy loads carrying lumber roofing materials, windows, electrical supplies, copper pipe fixtures, bags of concrete. A generator the size of a small car was positioned in the front lot. Power tools materialized from saddlebags and truck beds. Danny had organized teams. He moved between them with the authority of a foreman who had long since stopped needing to raise his voice, a word here, a redirect there, the quiet management of a large and skilled workforce that knew what it was doing and needed only coordination, not instruction. The roof came off first, not destructively, methodically, the damaged sections identified and removed in the correct sequence, the underlying structure exposed and assessed. Eleanor stood in her yard and watched men she had never met before pull apart the top of her house with professional confidence, and she felt a complicated thing that took her a few minutes to identify. It was grief briefly, the house being open to the sky again, its damaged interior exposed. She had looked at that sagging roofline for so long that its wrongness had become familiar. And familiar things, even wrong ones, carry a weight when they are finally corrected. And then underneath the grief, something else. Something she had not felt in a very long time. She was still trying to name it when Donna Wakefield appeared beside her. Donna had brought the diner's full coffee service, 2 large urns in the back of her truck, paper cups, enough pastry for a small army, which was approximately what she was facing. She had also brought her dishwasher, her 2 waitstaff, and a folding table, and within 20 minutes she had established a functional food service operation on the road shoulder that she proceeded to run with the calm efficiency she brought to everything. "You don't have to do this," Eleanor said. "I know I don't," Donna said. "That's what makes it worth doing." She handed Eleanor a fresh cup of coffee. "Go sit on the porch and watch. You've been managing things alone long enough. Let it be managed for a minute." Eleanor sat on her porch. She watched. She watched Sandra Briggs come down the street at 9:30 carrying a covered dish with both hands. Sandra walked up to the nearest cluster of workers, set the dish down on a folding table that had materialized in the yard, said something brief, and walked away. She did not look at Eleanor. That was all right. The dish was there. That was what mattered. She watched Sheriff Ray Dobson park his cruiser at the east end of the work zone and spend the better part of an hour managing the traffic that was backing up on Route 66, not grudgingly, not with the manner of a man performing an obligation, but with the practical, engaged efficiency of someone who had decided what side he was on and was comfortable with it. He came up to the porch around 11. "Morning, Eleanor." "Morning, Ray." He stood looking at the organized activity on and around her house for a moment. A new ridge beam was going in on the roof. The upper windows, the plywood ones, had been removed and the frames were being rehabbed. "I should have done something," he said. "The county has programs for this kind of thing. I should have flagged your situation years ago." "I didn't ask anyone to flag my situation." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not really an excuse." Eleanor looked at him. "No," she said. "It's not. But you're here now." That was all she said about it. It was enough. Tom Archer arrived at noon, and to his credit, he did not arrive with the aggressive purposefulness of a man who believed his presence was the main event. He arrived quietly with a notebook in a diffident manner, and he asked Eleanor if she was willing to talk while he watched the work proceed, and she said yes. She told him the truth of it plainly, without ornament. She told him about Tuesday evening, the storm, the 30 men, the decision to open the gate. She told him about Frank, about the 36 years in the house and the lessons she had learned from a man who had believed without complication or caveat that the way you treated people revealed everything that mattered about who you were. "Why do you think they came back?" Tom asked. 800 people. That's an extraordinary response to one dinner. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, watching a team of electricians running new wire through the side wall of her house. "Because it's rare," she said finally. "Being treated like a human being, being assumed decent until proven otherwise, it's rarer than it should be. And when people experience it, especially people who have been told their whole lives that they're not worth that assumption, they don't forget it." She looked at the road, at the hundreds of bikes parked along it. "They can't afford to forget it. It's too important." Tom wrote this down. "And what do you want people to take from this?" he asked. Eleanor looked at him. "I want people to understand that I didn't do anything remarkable," she said. "That's the whole point. What I did should be ordinary. It should be the thing anyone does. The fact that it isn't the fact that you're writing an article about it, that's the problem, not the solution." Tom Archer wrote down everything she said. He wrote it carefully because he was a good enough journalist to recognize when someone was handing him the actual story rather than a version of it. His piece would run on Monday. By Wednesday of the following week, it would have been read by more people than had read anything previously published in the Flagstaff Courier's 104-year history. Eleanor did not read it until Donna brought her a copy on Tuesday morning. By then, she was already living in a different house, or rather, the same house remade. The work continued through the day and into the evening, lights rigged up on poles when the sun went down, the generator powering everything, the sound of drills and hammers, and the voices of working people filling the night air in a way that Eleanor had not heard from this property since Frank was alive and building things. She stayed in the small room at the back that was the only interior space left undisturbed by the renovation, and she listened to it and she let herself feel what she felt, which was something that kept trying to resolve itself into a single word and kept resisting. She slept better than she had in years. Donna had offered her guest room, had insisted on it, in Donna's particular way of insisting, which left no real room for refusal. But Eleanor had declined. This was her house. She would stay in it while it was being rebuilt around her. That felt right to her in a way she could not entirely explain and did not feel she needed to. 3 days. 3 mornings of waking up to the sound of purposeful work and the smell of lumber, and the knowledge that somewhere on the other side of the wall, a large number of people were engaged in an act that she was still not fully sure how to account for. On the morning of the third day, Danny Reeves knocked on the door of the back room at 7 a.m. and said simply, "It's ready." Eleanor stood. She straightened her cardigan. She put her hand on the door. She was not a sentimental woman by nature or by practice. She had buried a husband and raised a child alone and managed 15 years of diminishing circumstances without allowing herself the luxury of prolonged sentiment. She was not going to begin now, but her hand stayed on the door for a moment, just a moment. Then she opened it and stepped through and went to see what had been done. The hallway was the first thing she saw, and she stopped in it. It was the same hallway it had always been, same dimensions, same orientation, same window at the far end that looked out to the backyard. But the floor was new hardwood, pale oak running straight and even toward the light. The walls had been repaired and painted a color she recognized immediately as the color Frank had originally chosen in 1976, a warm cream, not quite white, the color of good paper. She had not told anyone that. She did not know how they had known it. She stood there for a moment, not moving, taking it in the way you take in something that is both familiar and entirely changed. Danny was behind her, and Marcus, and 4 or 5 others, whose names she had learned over the past 3 days. She was aware of them distantly as a person is aware of the room they are standing in. But what she was attending to was the house itself. She walked toward the kitchen. The countertops were new, solid, clean, the kind of surface you could actually work on. The cabinets had been replaced with ones that were simple and well-made without ornament, which was right. Frank had never liked ornament. He had liked things that were built correctly and showed it. The appliances were new. The fixture above the sink was the kind that gave good light for work rather than the kind that gave the impression of good light. Someone had understood the difference. She ran her hand along the counter's edge. On the wall, in exactly the place it had always hung, the same nail she would have sworn, or one placed with reference to a ghost of the original, was the photograph of Frank and Eleanor at the doorway of the finished house in 1976. It had been clean. The glass was new. The frame was intact, and Frank stood in it with sawdust on his jeans, and that expression she had loved for 36 years, and would love until there was nothing left of her to love anything. She looked at it for a long time. Nobody spoke. The men behind her understood without being told that this was not a moment for words. Then she turned and went upstairs. The staircase was solid under her feet in a way it had not been in years. Not a creak, not a shift, not the particular give of wood that has been compressed past its tolerance. The handrail was new and set at the right height, which was a small thing and not a small thing. She had been gripping that rail with more care each year, testing it before she trusted it. She would not need to do that anymore. The upper floor was light in a way she had forgotten it could be. The plywood was gone. The windows were whole, real glass, properly fitted, the afternoon light coming through them clean and unobstructed. The rooms that she had stopped entering because they reminded her of what she could not fix were simply rooms again. Proportioned right, lit correctly. Smelling of fresh paint and new lumber in the particular combination that had been the smell of Frank's working years. She went to the bedroom last. It was her room. Whatever else had been changed or improved or remade, this room was still hers, and whoever had worked on it had understood that. The window unit was new. She could hear its quiet efficiency already, but it had been installed in the same window-oriented, the same direction, taking up no more of the sill than the old one had. The floor was the same oak as the hallway. The walls were the same cream. On the bed, folded with the careful precision of someone who had handled it with deliberate respect, was the quilt she had made herself in the winter of 1989, the one she had spread over Marcus Calloway and his 30 riders on Tuesday night. She had not expected to see it again in the condition it had left her hands in. The materials were old, the stitching was hers, the pattern was one her grandmother had taught her. It was not valuable in any commercial sense. It was not replaceable in any sense at all. It had been cleaned, carefully by someone who understood what they were handling. It lay on the new bed, the frame was new. She noticed solid and correctly built, with the particular squareness of a frame that will not shift or creak, and it looked as it had looked when she finished it 35 years ago. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed. She did not cry immediately. She was not a woman who cried easily or often, and she did not begin now simply because the room was beautiful and the quilt was clean and the window was whole. These were good things. They deserved better than immediate tears. But when she looked at the quilt and then looked at the window with its clear glass and its afternoon light, and then looked at the doorway where Danny and Marcus were standing, not intruding, just present, just there she understood something she had been approaching for 3 days without quite arriving at. She was safe. It was such a simple thing, such an ordinary fundamental thing, that most people move through their lives without having to consciously register it. And she had not felt it, not fully, not without reservation, since the evening 15 years ago when she had sat in a hospital chair and held Frank's hand as the last of him went away, and understood in the hours that followed that the weight of this house and this life and everything that remained undone would now fall entirely on her. 15 years of managing, of making do, of calculating every month what could be deferred and what could not, what could be patched, and what would have to wait for a better time that kept not arriving. 15 years of looking at a roof that sagged and windows covered with plywood and a porch step that had broken through, and choosing not to see them because seeing them folly would have required feeling the full weight of what she could not fix. She was safe. She breathed. After a moment, she stood up, straightened her cardigan, and went back downstairs. The yard had been cleared of the construction materials. The generator was gone. The folding tables and the coffee urns and the detritus of 3 days of large-scale work had been removed, and what remained was a yard that was leveled and clean, the dirt raked smooth, the vegetable garden at the back newly fenced with good wire and solid posts. Someone had staked the tomato plants that had been leaning. Someone had edged the garden beds. The porch was the last thing she examined, and she examined it the way Frank would have, walking its full length, testing each board with her weight, checking the level of the railing with her eye. The boards were new, Douglas fir, tight-grained and solid. The steps were correctly built, 4 of them, each one true, each one carrying weight without complaint. The third step, the one she had been skipping by habit for 3 months, was indistinguishable from the others. She stepped on it 3 times. Marcus was standing in the yard watching her do this, and something in his expression, something he was not quite able to contain, was very close to what Eleanor recognized as happiness. "It's good work," she said. "Danny doesn't do other kinds." She looked at the house, the full face of it from the yard for the first time in years, without the sag of the roof line or the dark rectangles of plywood pulling her eye. New shingles correctly laid. New windows, every one. The exterior walls had been repaired and primed, not painted, because they had asked her what color she wanted, and she had told them she would choose the paint herself, which was her right, and they had accepted this without argument. The house stood the way Frank had built it to stand, solid and square and right. She took all of this in slowly with the deliberate attention of someone who intends to remember what they are seeing. That evening, after most of the crew had eaten and dispersed, and the road in front of the property had thinned from hundreds of bikes to a few dozen, Eleanor went to her kitchen, picked up the phone, and dialed a California number. It rang 4 times. She had rehearsed nothing. She had decided only that she was going to make this call and say what she was going to say, and that was preparation enough. "Mom," Laurel's voice startled, careful. "The house has a room for you," Eleanor said. "It always did, but now it's a room worth coming to, if you want it." A silence, not the silence of refusal, the silence of someone recalibrating. "Mom, you don't have to decide tonight. I'm telling you it's there." Eleanor looked out the kitchen window at the evening road, the last of the day's light lying orange across the asphalt. "That's all I'm saying." Another silence. Then I'll come. I want to come. All right, Eleanor said. Come when you can. She did not make it a production. She did not extract promises or assign timelines or do any of the things that the weight of 8 years of silence might have justified doing. She said what she had to say, and she let Laurel respond to it. And when they hung up 20 minutes later, 20 minutes of careful, real conversation. The first real conversation in 8 years. Eleanor sat for a while in the kitchen in Frank's chair and thought about the relationship between opening a door and what walks through it. It was not the first time she had thought about this. Marcus found her there when he knocked on the back door to tell her they were finishing up. He stood in the doorway with his jacket in his hand, and he looked at her sitting in Frank's chair with the particular ease of someone who had finally located the place they were supposed to be, and he said he had something else to give her. He came in, sat across from her at the kitchen table, put down two things. The first was an envelope. She did not open it immediately. She looked at it. That's the mortgage, he said. Paid in full, recorded with the county Tuesday. The house is yours clear. Eleanor looked at the envelope for a long moment. The number she had read in the bank letter, the number she had been carrying for 15 years, like something heavy in a thin bag, was simply gone. She understood this intellectually. It would take some time for the rest of her to catch up. Marcus, we took a vote, he said. It was unanimous. Don't argue with a unanimous vote, Mrs. Hartwell. It's not a fight you'll win. She looked at him. He was watching her with the expression she had first noticed on Tuesday night, that careful internal quality, the look of a man who is holding something and has not yet decided whether the moment is right to put it down. The moment she understood now was right. He reached into his jacket and produced something small. He set it on the table between them. It was a photograph, old and creased its edges, worn soft with handling. The colors had the particular amber cast of photographs from the early 1980s. The dye shifted by years of light and time. Eleanor looked at it. It was a wedding photograph. She was in it. Frank was in it. It was a photograph she had recognized all her life, but this was not her copy of it. Her copy was in the album in the living room where it had always been. This copy was something else. She picked it up, turned it over. On the back, in Frank's handwriting, the handwriting she had read 10,000 times over 36 years, the handwriting on the notes he left on the kitchen counter when he went to work early, the handwriting she still sometimes looked for in places where it could not possibly appear, were 4 words. Always open the door. She held it. She did not speak. Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke carefully, the way a man speaks when he is delivering something he has carried for a long time and wants to put down with appropriate care. I was 19, he said. This would have been late 1985. I was in Phoenix. I had been living rough for about 8 months, family situation I won't go into, not relevant. 3 days without a proper meal. I was sitting on a curb on the east side of the city, and a man in a contractor's truck pulled over. Eleanor set the photograph down. She looked at Marcus. He took me to a diner, sat across from me. Didn't ask why I was where I was. Didn't ask what I'd done or not done. Fed me. When I was done, he put his card on the table and told me there was a framing job starting Monday on a house in Scottsdale, and he needed someone who could follow directions and wasn't afraid of heights. Marcus paused. He said, "Pay it forward, son." Those were the last words he said to me before he got up and left. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the last of the day's light was going. The card had his name on it, Marcus said. Frank Hartwell, Hartwell Construction. I looked at it for him for years after I got myself straight. I had a name in a city, and I looked every way I knew how. He'd moved or retired, or the business had closed. I couldn't find him. He looked at the photograph on the table between them. I had that photograph because he left his wallet on the diner table by accident when he left. I found it outside, must have fallen from his pocket. I looked inside for his address. The wallet was empty except for his card, which I already had, and that photograph. He looked at Eleanor directly. I kept it because I intended to return it, and then I kept it because I couldn't find him, and then I kept it because he stopped. Because it reminded me that one person doing one ordinary thing could change the direction of someone's entire life. I needed to remember that. There were years when I needed to remember it very badly. Eleanor's hand was flat on the table. She looked at it. When I saw your name in the article, Marcus said, Eleanor Hartwell, Seligman, Arizona, I knew. I knew who you were, and I knew who your husband was, and I knew why you had opened your gate on Tuesday night in a monsoon without hesitating. He paused. You didn't learn that from nothing, Mrs. Hartwell. You learned that from 36 years with a man who carried a four-word philosophy in his wallet and lived it every day. He saved my life with a meal in a diner. And then 40 years later, his wife saved 30 men from a storm. And it wasn't a coincidence. It was the same thing done by the same kind of people. Eleanor looked at the photograph. At Frank in 1976 with his arm around her, and his eyes the way his eyes always were full of the particular warmth of someone who genuinely expected the world to reward decency and was usually right. Always open the door. She had not known he carried this. She had not known about the 19-year-old on the Phoenix curb. She had not known about the diner or the wallet or the card. Frank had not told her this story, and she understood sitting in his chair in the kitchen he had built why he had not. It was not the kind of thing Frank talked about. Frank did not talk about the good he did. He just did it the way he built things because it needed doing, because he was in a position to do it, because the alternative was not something he could consider. She had known this about him. She had known it and loved it and had tried in her own way to carry it forward through 36 years of marriage and 15 years of living alone with it as her primary inheritance. She had apparently been more successful than she had realized. He would have liked you, she said finally. Her voice was steady. She had decided it would be. He would have liked all of this. She looked around the kitchen, the new surfaces, the clean light, the photograph on the wall that someone had cleaned because it mattered. He would have said it was too much. It's not enough, Marcus said. I know. She looked at him. But it's what's here, and what's here is... She stopped, pressed her lips together. It's more than I expected to have again. That's the truth of it. She picked up the old photograph. She looked at Frank. She looked at her own young face beside his. Then she set it down and slid it back across the table toward Marcus. You keep it, she said. Mrs. Hartwell. You've kept it for 40 years. It belongs with you now. You know what it means. She looked at him steadily. I know what he believed. I don't need the photograph to remember it. Marcus looked at the photograph for a moment. Then he picked it up carefully and returned it to his jacket. They sat in the kitchen for a while after that, with the lights on against the darkening evening, talking about ordinary things, the work, the town, the road. The way that Route 66 looked in certain lights at certain times of year. What Frank had been like in the specific and daily way that a person is like themselves, his habit of leaving coffee cups in improbable locations, his belief that a properly built staircase was one of the purest expressions of human competence, his complete inability to drive past a roadside vegetable stand without stopping. Marcus laughed at this last one. He bought tomatoes from me, he said, from a stand I was running outside the diner where he fed me the following summer. He never knew who I was. Eleanor shook her head slowly. Of course he did. Of course he stopped. When Marcus left that night, the road was quiet and clear, the town of Seligman settling into its familiar evening quiet. Eleanor stood on her new porch and watched his taillights disappear east on Route 66, and then she stood there for a while longer, in the warm night air, looking at the road. The next morning, 800 motorcycles gathered in front of her house for the last time. They filled the road in both directions, the same river of chrome and leather, and people that had arrived 3 days ago, arranged now in the orderly formation of departure. The noise of their engines building in sequence from east to west was the same rolling thunder it had been on arrival. Something geological, something felt in the chest before it was heard in the ears. Eleanor stood on her porch. She was wearing her good cardigan, the blue one she kept for occasions. She had made coffee. She had drunk it on the porch in Frank's chair in the clear morning light, and she had looked at her house, the solid walls, the true roof line, the whole windows catching the early sun, and she had sat with the remarkable fact of it until it felt, if not ordinary, then at least real. Marcus came to the porch one last time. He stood at the bottom of the new steps, 4 of them, true, and leveled the third one, indistinguishable from the rest, and he looked up at her. We'll come by, he said, monthly. Someone will come by. You don't need to check on me. We're not checking on you, he said. We're visiting. She looked at him. There's a difference. There is, and I mean the second one. She nodded once. She believed him. There was a moment, then a held moment, the kind that doesn't require words, because everything that needs to be said has been said. And what remains is simply the acknowledgement that something real occurred here, something that will not be undone by time or distance or the ordinary forgetting that life requires. Safe roads, Marcus, she said. Safe roads, Eleanor, he said. And then after a brief pause with the slight difficulty of someone saying something they had rehearsed and were not certain of until the moment they said it, thank you. She shook her head. Frank would have done the same. I know, he said. That's what I'm thanking you for. He went back to his bike. 800 engines settled into their formation, the sound building and leveling as they found their speed. And then they moved east on Route 66, a river flowing toward the horizon, filling the morning with sound and motion, and the long, chrome-bright flash of sunlight on metal. As the convoy passed her house, each rider raised a hand to their heart, one by one. All 800, Eleanor stood on her porch with her hand on the railing of the railing Frank had built and watched until the last of them disappeared around the eastern curve and the sound diminished and thinned and finally was gone, and Route 66 was quiet and the morning was still, and the town of Seligman, Arizona was just itself again. 460 souls, 2 gas stations, 1 diner, a post office open, 3 days a week, and 1 house solid and remade standing at the road's edge in the clear light. She went inside. She made fresh coffee. She sat in Frank's chair. She stayed. What the months that followed brought to Seligman was quiet and cumulative and real. Not dramatic. Real changes rarely are. The motorcycle convoys that passed through on Route 66 found businesses that stayed open, people who waved a diner that put out the welcome in a way it had not before. Sheriff Dobson, who had submitted his own written account to the county unprompted, specific, honest about his failures and his corrections, became the kind of law enforcement presence that the road required rather than the kind it had suffered. Sandra Briggs started a neighborhood directory, which was not a transformation exactly, but was evidence of something moving in the right direction. Laurel came at Christmas. She drove from California with her 2 children, Eleanor's grandchildren, 12 and 9, whom she had not seen in 6 years. They stayed for 4 days. The visit was not easy in the way that only real things can be not easy, full of the awkward, necessary work of people relearning each other across a distance of time. But Laurel stood in the kitchen on the second morning, drinking coffee at the new counter, and she said, "The house looks like itself again." And Eleanor said, "It does." And that was the beginning. Marcus came the first Monday of every month without fail. Sometimes Danny came with him. Sometimes others she came to know by name, Reeves from Tucson, who had done the electrical, Patterson from Flagstaff, who had laid the oak floors, a quiet man called Whitfield, who had built the porch railing, and who could not apparently pass through Seligman without checking that it was still level. They came with no agenda beyond the visit. They drank her coffee. They fixed things that needed fixing before she had to ask. They became, in the way that people become things gradually, and then all at once, family. She lived in her house for 11 more years. They were not easy years in the way that years are not easy when a person is in their 70s and then 80s, and the body begins to make its negotiations with time. The arthritis in her right hand worsened. She gave up driving at 80. Laurel came for longer visits and eventually for stays that were not really visits at all. The grandchildren, growing into themselves, came on their own terms and in their own ways, and they sat in the kitchen that Frank had built and Eleanor had kept and strangers had remade, and they were loud in the good way that young people are loud when they are comfortable. Marcus installed a handrail on the inside staircase without being asked, arriving one October morning with Patterson and a specific idea about where the rail needed to go, and Eleanor let them do it because it was needed and because she had long since understood the difference between accepting help and accepting defeat. She died on a Thursday morning in May, 11 years and 4 months after the storm. She was in her bed in her room with the morning light coming through the whole glass of the window Frank had put there and other hands had restored. She was 84 years old, and she had lived in her house on her road doing what she believed in for the entirety of her adult life. Donna Wakefield called Marcus. He made the calls that needed to be made. 800 motorcycles came back to Seligman on the day of the funeral. They filled Route 66 in both directions, the same road, the same formation, the same people in some cases, and different people who had heard the story and understood what it meant to be there. They stood in the cemetery in the May heat, 800 of them, quiet and present, while the service was conducted. They did not impose on the ceremony. They were simply there, which was the right thing to be. Laurel saw them from where she stood at the graveside, and she did not find them frightening or strange. She found them in the plain language of what she actually felt moving. She found them the way her mother had always found people, as people exactly that, nothing more complicated than what they were. Afterwards, Seligman's two gas stations ran out of fuel. Donna's diner served coffee until midnight. The gravestone, which Eleanor had chosen herself 3 years earlier, with the practical foresight that had characterized her entire adult life, bore her name and Frank's name and their years, and that was exactly what she had asked for. Beside it, on the morning after the funeral, someone placed a small metal plate in the ground. It was fixed securely as though it had been prepared with care. It was not signed. No one who was asked would confirm who had placed it. It read, "She saw people where others saw strangers. She opened her door when others locked theirs. She gave shelter and warmth and dignity, and she asked nothing in return but that it be paid forward. Always open the door. F.H. 1976. The plate remained through all the winters that followed. Visitors came to look at it, not many, but steady, a thin and continuous stream of people who had read an article or heard a story or been told by someone who had been told by someone else. They stood in the Seligman cemetery and looked at the name Eleanor Hartwell and the small plate beside it and the date Frank had put those 4 words in his wallet, and they thought about what it meant to hold a belief so completely that it outlasted you by decades and traveled in ways you would never be able to track. Route 66 ran past the cemetery gates. It still did. It had always run past everything in Seligman. It ran past the diner and the gas stations and the house at the road's edge that stood solid and square and correctly built against whatever weather came. The house had good bones. That was what Danny said when he came back the following summer to check the roof line. Good bones, built right, built to last. He was correct. Frank had built it that way.